In 1861, the American South tried to hold the industrial world hostage. Not with iron, not with coal, not with oil, with cotton. Southern leaders believed they had found the weakness of the modern age. Britain had mills. France had mills. Those mills needed raw fiber every day. If the South stopped sending cotton, machines would slow, workers would go hungry, merchants would panic, and European governments would be forced to protect the slave society that fed their factories. That was the gamble. They called it King Cotton. Picture the scene. A bale sits on a dock in New Orleans, stamped, weighed, and ready for shipment. In Liverpool, a broker watches the price. In Manchester, a girl stands between machines that cannot run without fiber. In Mississippi, an enslaved woman bends over the plant that makes all three lives connected. The object in the middle is almost weightless in the hand. But politically, it is explosive. How did a soft white fiber become powerful enough to make slaveholders believe they could blackmail the industrial world? Cotton did not begin as a weapon. Long before European factories wanted it, cotton was knowledge. People in India, Africa, the Middle East, and the Americas knew how to grow it, clean it, spin it, dye it, and weave it. In India, cotton textiles became famous across trade routes because they could do what older European fabrics often could not. They could be light, washable, colorful, patterned, and comfortable against the skin. That mattered more than it sounds. Cloth is not a luxury at the edge of life. It touches everyone. It covers the body. It marks class. It fills homes. It becomes trade, status, hygiene, uniform, fashion, and identity. Think about that. Before cotton became cheap, it already had the most dangerous quality a commodity can have. People wanted it. European consumers wanted Indian calicos and muslins so much that older wool and linen interests feared them. Restrictions could slow imports, but they could not kill desire. The cloth had already shown a future. Lighter clothing, printed patterns, washable fabric, and a consumer market that wanted more. Then industrial Britain asked the question that changes the whole story. What if cotton cloth could be made faster than human hands could make it? Machines answered first. The spinning jenny water frame, mule, and power loom turned cotton into one of the central materials of the Industrial Revolution. A worker could now stand inside a room where machines multiplied thread and cloth at speeds older artisans could not match. Rivers, steam engines, brick mills, bells, wages, smoke, and factory discipline gathered around the fiber. Manchester became the warning sign of the New World. It grew with warehouses, canals, chimneys, counting houses, and streets of workers whose lives were organized by factory time. Cotton made the city look modern, but modernity here did not mean freedom. It meant speed. It meant repetition. It meant a human body placed next to a machine and judged by output. The cloth became cheaper. The pressure moved backward through the chain, but every machine created a new hunger. A spinning machine does not grow cotton. A power loom does not pick cotton. A factory can multiply cloth only if someone, somewhere, supplies mountains of raw fiber. That is the first major twist. The machines that looked like the future made the plantation more valuable. British factories did not free cotton from violence. They increased demand for the thing violence could produce cheaply. The more efficiently Manchester spun thread, the more urgently planters needed land and labor across the Atlantic. Then came the cotton gin in 1793. Eli Whitney developed a machine patented the next year that is often remembered as a symbol of progress. It did make it faster to separate cotton fiber from seed, but in the American South, that efficiency did not shrink slavery. It supercharged it. Before the gin, much short staple cotton was too slow to clean at scale. After the gin, the crop could spread across the interior South. U.S. cotton production rose from a tiny export at the end of the 18th century to millions of bales by 1860. Land that had been frontier became future cotton country. Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas became part of an expanding cotton map. But maps do not clear themselves. Native nations were forced from land, forests were cut, roads and rivers became export routes. Enslaved people were sold from older slave states into the Deep South. The domestic slave trade became the human conveyor belt of cotton expansion. Imagine this. A planter sees a new field. A banker sees collateral. A trader sees bodies to sell south. A speculator sees native land turned into acreage. A factory owner across the ocean sees raw material. Cotton joined all of them. By the middle of the 19th century, this was no small crop economy. Cotton had become the leading American export, often representing more than half the value of all U.S. exports before the Civil War. On the eve of that war, roughly 3/4 of the cotton-feeding British factories came from the United States. That meant a field in Mississippi could affect wages in Lancashire, credit in New York, insurance in Liverpool, and politics in Washington. That is the second twist. Cotton was not just a crop, it was infrastructure. It moved through ports, banks, warehouses, ships, insurance offices, textile towns, and slave markets. A bale was not only fiber, it was a promise that debts could be paid, ships could sail, mills could run, and more land could be bought. This is where cotton becomes colder than a plantation image alone can show. It entered finance. Planters borrowed against future crops. They borrowed against land. They borrowed against enslaved people. Human beings became collateral inside a credit system that reached far beyond the field. A banker did not have to swing a whip to profit from cotton slavery. A merchant did not have to own a plantation to depend on it. The violence could be converted into paper, signatures, interest, and risk. That made cotton harder to see and harder to stop, but the promise rested on terror. On plantations, cotton was measured through the body. Picking quotas mattered, sacks were weighed, shortfalls could bring punishment. Overseers watched the rows. Children entered the labor world early. Women worked under heat, pregnancy, fear, and exhaustion. By 1860, almost 4 million people were enslaved in the United States, and cotton was the crop most closely tied to the expansion of that slave society. Families lived with the knowledge that sale could break them at any time. Picture the scene. At dusk, workers bring in the sacks. The cotton is weighed, the number is written down. A man who picked too little stands in danger. A mother listens for news of a trader. A child learns that the crop has a number, and so does a person. This is what the soft fiber hides. It turned land into output, output into credit, credit into expansion, and human beings into capital. A shirt could begin with a loan secured by an enslaved person. That loan could buy land. That land could produce cotton. That cotton could cross the Atlantic. That cloth could enter a shop as evidence of modern progress, and the customer might never see the auction block behind it. Cotton also created victims outside the plantation. In Britain, factory labor had its own violence. The worker was not legally owned, but the mill still consumed time, lungs, bodies, and childhood. Cotton dust filled the air. Machines moved fast. Bells ruled the day. Wages depended on a system no worker controlled. In India, the wound took another form. The same region whose cotton textiles had helped create European desire now faced British industrial competition and imperial power. Machine-made cloth from British mills entered colonial markets. Many Indian weavers faced collapsing livelihoods. Cotton did not simply move from old craft to new industry. It moved through conquest, tariff power, and unequal markets. Think about that. The fiber could enslave one worker, underpay another, ruin a third, and still arrive in Europe as affordable clothing. That is not a side story. That is the system. Once cotton worked, it trained people to confuse cheapness with progress. But every system has a breaking point. For cotton, that point came when the men who profited most from slavery believed the fiber made them untouchable. When the Civil War began in 1861, Confederate leaders expected cotton diplomacy to work. If they withheld cotton, they believed Britain or France would intervene. The industrial world, they thought, would not choose principle over raw material. At first, the threat looked real. The Union blockade reduced exports. Cotton ships were stopped. Warehouses emptied. British mills slowed. From 1861 to 1865, workers in Lancashire suffered through what became known as the cotton famine. Families depended on relief. A war fought in North America entered homes across the Atlantic through hunger wages and closed mills. Cotton had become powerful enough to export crisis. But here comes the reversal. King Cotton did not save the Confederacy. Britain did not enter the war for the South. Other supplies expanded. Egypt and India became more important. Manufacturers adapted, painfully, unevenly, but enough. The commodity that had made the South feel indispensable also revealed its dependency. Cotton needed markets, ships, recognition, finance, and open routes. Without them, the king was trapped inside his own fields. Then the deeper break came from below. Enslaved people did not wait passively for cotton diplomacy to decide their fate. They fled plantations, crossed Union lines, withheld labor, served the Union war effort, and made emancipation a military and political fact. The Cotton Kingdom had been built by forced labor. Its collapse was accelerated by the people it had tried to reduce to labor. That is the third twist. Cotton helped build slavery's power, but the War of 1861 to 1865 helped destroy slavery as law. Yet the story does not end with emancipation because commodities rarely die when one legal system falls. They adapt. After the Civil War, cotton survived by changing the trap. Sharecropping and crop liens tied many black families to land through debt. The contract replaced the auction block. The merchant's account replaced the overseer's book. The language changed from ownership to obligation, but cotton still controlled the year. Picture the scene. A farmer brings cotton to a merchant after months of work. Rent is subtracted, seed is subtracted, food is subtracted, tools are subtracted, interest is subtracted. The numbers are controlled by someone else. At the bottom of the page, freedom meets a balance still unpaid. The old plantation had lost its legal foundation, but the ledger survived. Across the world, cotton kept moving through new forms of power. Egypt expanded cultivation under global pressure. India remained tied to imperial cotton networks. Southern mills grew. Railroads and merchants reorganized the crop economy. Later, mechanical pickers reduced the need for hand labor and helped push many families out of rural cotton regions altogether. The machine returned again. First, it had intensified slavery. Later, it helped erase the labor system that had followed slavery. Cotton kept surviving because the demand never disappeared. It became denim, uniforms, underwear, sheets, towels, medical gauze, tents, dresses, and t-shirts. It clothed soldiers, workers, babies, prisoners, factory hands, office workers, and presidents. It moved from plantation fields into department stores, wardrobes, hospitals, armies, and global fashion. That is the final disguise. Iron looks industrial, coal looks dirty, oil smells like machinery, cotton feels clean, it touches the skin. It enters the bed, it wraps newborns, it becomes summer clothing, school clothes, work clothes, and the plain white t-shirt. The more intimate it becomes, the less violent it appears. But ordinary does not mean innocent. Ordinary means the route has become efficient enough to disappear. Today, a cotton shirt does not show the dock, the gin, the auction block, the mill, the blockade, the crop lien, the displaced weaver, the dust-filled factory, or the family trapped by debt. It shows size, color, brand, price, and that is exactly why the object is dangerous as history. It teaches the consumer to see the final surface, not the route. The softness is real, the comfort is real, but comfort is not the same thing as innocence. Cotton became powerful because it could absorb violence, distance, debt, and empire, then return as something clean enough to wear. That is why cotton belongs in the history of power. It made slavery expand at the same moment industry claimed to be modern. It made factories dependent on plantations. It made a crop into collateral, a bale into credit, a fiber into diplomacy, and a shirt into the final object of a global chain. So, the next time cotton touches your skin, do not see only fabric. See the field, see the gin, see the ship, see the mill, see the ledger, see the blockade, see the debt. Cotton was never just cotton. It was power. Thank you for watching until the end. If you want more stories about the objects, systems, and hidden forces that built the modern world, subscribe to the channel. The next story is already waiting. See you in the next video.